My name is Alexandra Chen, but everyone calls me Alex. For 3 years, I've worked as a receptionist at Elite Motors, Miami's most prestigious Ferrari dealership. But what my boss, Richard Sterling, never knew was that I was far more than just the woman who answered his phones. The morning everything changed started like any other. I arrived early at 7:30 a.m., the Miami sun already blazing against the gleaming rows of Ferraris worth more than most people's lifetime earnings. The dealership was a stunning piece of architecture, all glassed and sweeping curves, designed to showcase the multimillion-dollar inventory inside. I remember straightening my simple black blazer before unlocking the front doors, the familiar scent of leather and new car interiors greeting me. "Morning, Alex," called out Marco, our head mechanic, as he wheeled a Ferrari F8 Tributo into the service bay. "Any chance of getting those overtime forms processed today? The guys are asking about last month's holiday weekend." I grimaced, thinking of the stack of overtime requests sitting in Richard's inbox. "I'll try again at the morning meeting," I promised. The service team had worked through Memorial Day weekend to handle a special event, but Richard had been too busy to approve their extra pay for 3 weeks straight. What no one at Elite Motors knew, not Richard, not the sales team with their matching Rolexes, not even kind-hearted Marco, was that I had a very personal interest in seeing the dealership run properly. The truth was carefully hidden in layers of holding companies and real estate trusts. I owned the land the dealership sat on, all 5 acres of prime Miami commercial property. It had been my grandfather's last gift to me before he passed away 3 years ago. "Property is power, little one," he told me from his hospital bed, his voice weak but his eyes sharp as ever. "But knowledge, knowing when to reveal your power, that's everything." So I followed his advice. I took the receptionist position at Elite Motors to learn the business from the ground up, watching and waiting. I had an MBA from Wharton and enough family money to never work again. But grandfather had taught me the value of understanding every level of a business. And what I've learned about Richard Sterling over 3 years made my blood boil. The morning meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp in the dealership's glass-walled conference room. Richard swept in last, as usual, his custom Tom Ford suit perfectly pressed. "Let's make this quick," he announced, not bothering to sit down. "Sales numbers for last month were decent, but I know we can do better. Jenkins, your team needs to push the F8s harder. We got too many sitting on the lot." I cleared my throat softly. "Mr. Sterling, about the service team's overtime forms." "Not now, Alex," he cut me off without even looking my way. "Sir, they've been waiting 3 weeks, and legally." Richard turned then, his face twisting into that familiar smirk that made my hand tighten on my notebook. "Look, if you're so concerned about a few hours of overtime, maybe you should find a job more suited to your capabilities. Answering phones can't be that demanding." The conference room went silent. I could feel Marco tensing behind me, could see Jenkins and the other salespeople suddenly finding their phones fascinating. "After all," Richard continued, clearly enjoying his audience, "it's not like you contribute anything meaningful here. You're just a receptionist. Frankly, a worthless one at that, since you can't seem to understand when to keep quiet." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. 3 years of watching Richard bully employees, dodge regulations, and cut corners had led to this moment. My grandfather's words echoed in my mind. "Knowledge is knowing when to reveal your power." "You're absolutely right, Mr. Sterling," I said quietly, reaching into my bag. "I am just a receptionist. But there's something you should see." I pulled out a thick manila envelope and removed several documents, sliding them across the polished conference table. "This is the deed to the land Elite Motors sits on. And these are the property tax records for the past 3 years. Richard glanced at the papers dismissively. "What's your point?" "The dealership has a long-term lease with some investment group. Chen Holdings or something. Chen Real Estate Trust, actually." I corrected him. "Founded by my grandfather 30 years ago. I inherited it when he passed away 3 years ago, right before I started working here." The color began draining from Richard's face as the implications sank in. I continued, my voice steady. "I also have here a complete record of every regulatory violation you've committed since taking over as owner. Every falsified emissions test, every illegal markup, every instance of overtime denial." I placed another stack of papers on the table. "The Ferrari corporate office might be interested in these. They take their brand reputation very seriously." Richard's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. "You're bluffing. You can't." "I can." I cut him off. "And I will. You see, the lease agreement has some very specific clauses about regulatory compliance and ethical business practices. Clauses you violated repeatedly." I stood up, smoothing my blazer. "You have until Monday morning to resign as owner and transfer your controlling shares to the employee trust I've set up. If you don't, I'll terminate the lease, notify Ferrari Corporate, and contact the Department of Labor about those overtime violations." I'm sure the Miami Herald would love the story too. The conference room erupted in chaos as I walked out. Marco caught up with me at my desk. 3 years, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "You worked the front desk for 3 years, dealing with his abuse when you owned the whole damn property." I smiled, thinking of my grandfather. I needed to understand the business from every angle, needed to know its true value, its people. I gestured to the overtime forms on my desk. "Speaking of which, let's get these processed. I think you'll find the new ownership much more prompt with payroll." Richard stormed out of the dealership an hour later, his face purple with rage. He tried to take the Ferrari he'd been using as his personal vehicle, but I'd already had Marco change the keys. "The car belongs to the dealership," I called out as he stood fuming in the parking lot. "But don't worry, I called you an Uber. After all, we wouldn't want to be worthless hosts." As his Uber pulled away, I sat down at my reception desk one last time and began composing an email to Ferrari's corporate office. By Monday morning, Elite Motors would have new ownership, new management, and a very different way of doing business. But first, I had some overtime forms to process. The weekend after my confrontation with Richard was anything but quiet. By Friday evening, my phone was already buzzing with calls from Ferrari's corporate office in Italy. I sat in what had been Richard's office, now mine, speaking in fluent Italian to their executives, explaining the situation and my plans for Elite Motors. Ms. Chen, the Ferrari VP of North American Operations, said, switching to English, "We've been concerned about Sterling's management for some time, but had no concrete evidence. You say you have documentation?" "Complete records," I confirmed, looking at the files I'd meticulously gathered over 3 years, including evidence of unauthorized markups on limited edition models, falsified service records, and customer complaints that were buried. There was a pause on the line. "And you've worked as the receptionist?" I smiled, remembering my grandfather's words about learning a business from the ground up. "The best way to understand a company's true operations is from the front desk, sir. You see everything, hear everything, and most importantly, if you're patient, you can document everything." The VP chuckled. "Your grandfather taught you well. Chen Holdings has been a respected name in Asian business circles for decades. We would be very interested in maintaining our relationship with Elite Motors under your leadership." By Sunday night, everything was in motion. Richard, faced with the choice between a graceful exit or legal destruction, had signed over his controlling shares to the employee trust I'd established. His last act was a desperate email to the staff, trying to paint himself as a victim of corporate espionage. I forwarded it to our lawyers without comment. Monday morning, I arrived early as usual, but not to sit at the reception desk. Instead, I gathered the entire staff in the showroom before opening. 60 pairs of eyes watched me as I stood in front of our flagship Ferrari SF90 Stradale. "Many of you have questions," I began, "about what happened Friday and what happens next. Let me be clear. Elite Motors isn't just changing ownership, we're changing how we do business entirely." I gestured to Marco, our head mechanic. "First, all outstanding overtime has been processed. The checks will be in your accounts by noon." A cheer went up from the service team. "Additionally, we're implementing a new profit-sharing program. Every employee, from sales to service to support staff, will now have equity in the dealership's success." Jenkins, our top salesman, raised his hand. "Ms. Chen, Alex, what about our sales targets? The pressure under Mr. Sterling was unsustainable and unethical." I finished. "We're moving to a customer-focused model. No more pushing cars on people who can't afford them. No more hidden fees or markups. Ferrari chose us to represent their brand because of excellence, not exploitation." I could see the tension leaving people's shoulders, replaced by cautious hope. "But make no mistake," I continued, "I expect excellence from every person in this room. We will be the most prestigious, most ethical, and most successful Ferrari dealership in North America. Not by cutting corners, but by doing things right. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of changes. I brought in a consulting team to modernize our systems, implemented a new customer service protocol, and personally reviewed every active sale to ensure it met our new ethical standards. Some customers were surprised to receive refund checks for unauthorized markups, along with VIP invitations to our upcoming client appreciation event. The transformation wasn't without its challenges. 2 salespeople, unable to adapt to our new ethical standards, quit. A few of Richard's old friends in the luxury car world tried to spread rumors about us. But the results spoke for themselves. By the end of the first month, our customer satisfaction scores had skyrocketed. Our service department's efficiency improved by 40% now that they had proper staffing and resources. Sales actually increased. It turned out that treating customers with respect and transparency led to more referrals and repeat business. 6 weeks after the takeover, I was working late in my office when Marco knocked on the door. "About a minute, boss?" he asked, holding a folder. "Always," I said, gesturing to a chair. "And please, it's still Alex." He sat down, shaking his head with a smile. "Still can't believe you spent 3 years answering phones and filing paperwork when you owned the whole place." "Best education I could have gotten," I replied. "I learned who the real heroes were, like a certain service team that stayed late every weekend to make sure customers' cars were perfect, even when they weren't getting paid overtime." Marco laughed. "About that, I wanted to show you something." He opened the folder, revealing service records. "Remember the SF90 that Richard could never figure out? The one with the intermittent electrical issue?" I nodded. It had been a source of constant customer complaints. "Well, with the new diagnostic equipment you approved and proper time to test it." He handed me the solution, neatly documented. "Fixed. Permanently." "Excellent work," I said, genuinely impressed. "Make sure the customer gets a detailed report and comp their next service as an apology for the wait." Marco stood to leave, then paused. "You know, the guys in service were talking. Richard used to say we were worthless grease monkeys. Called you worthless too. Funny how the worthless people turned out to be the ones who actually knew how to run this place right." After you left, I walked out to the showroom. The evening sun painted the Ferraris in shades of gold and crimson, their sleek lines reflecting the Miami sunset. On my grandfather's desk, now in my office, sat a framed photo of him standing in front of his first real estate acquisition. He was wearing overalls, having spent the day working alongside his maintenance crew. "Property is power," he'd always said. "But knowledge, knowing when to reveal your power, that's everything." I'd added my own lesson to his wisdom. True power isn't in humiliating others or proving your superiority. It's in building something meaningful, something that lifts everyone up. Elite Motors under Richard had been a monument to one man's ego. Now it was becoming something far more valuable. A business where excellence and ethics went hand in hand. Richard's worthless receptionist had turned out to be the owner he never saw coming. But more importantly, she turned his dealership into the success he could never achieve by valuing the very people he'd dismissed. The next morning, a familiar face appeared in the showroom. Richard's former assistant Lisa, who'd quit months ago after one too many verbal abuse incidents. "I heard things have changed," she said hesitantly. "That it's different now." I smiled, remembering how she'd always been kind to me when I was just the receptionist. "Very different. In fact, we're looking for a new customer relations manager, someone who knows our clients and understands the importance of treating people with respect." Her eyes widened. "Really? But I don't have a fancy degree or—" "You have something better," I cut in. "Experience, integrity, and first-hand knowledge of how not to treat people. When can you start?" As I showed her around her new office, I caught our reflection in the window. 2 women Richard had called worthless, now helping to run one of the most successful Ferrari dealerships in the country. The irony would have been sweet enough on its own. But the real victory wasn't in proving him wrong. The real victory was in proving ourselves right. 3 months after the takeover, Ferrari's corporate office sent a team to evaluate our operations. They spent a week reviewing every aspect of the business, from sales to service to customer satisfaction. Their final report was glowing, with one particular comment that made me smile. Elite Motors represents the perfect fusion of excellence and ethics. Ms. Chen's innovative approach, combining deep operational knowledge with a commitment to employee empowerment and customer satisfaction, sets a new standard for luxury automotive retail. I had the report framed and hung in the break room, right next to our new mission statement. Excellence is not what we do, it's who we are. Richard's name faded from Miami's luxury car scene, but Elite Motors thrived. Our employee trust grew in value month after month, creating wealth not just for the salespeople but for every person who contributed to our success. The once worthless receptionist had turned a toxic workplace into a model of ethical business practice. Sometimes, on quiet evenings after the showroom closes, I still sit at the front desk for a few minutes. It reminds me of those 3 years of watching, learning, and planning. But mostly it reminds me that true worth isn't in titles or power. It's in what you build, how you treat people, and the legacy you create. As for that overtime paperwork that sparked the final confrontation, it's now processed automatically every Friday with bonuses for exceptional service. After all, in a business built on excellence, no contribution is ever worthless. The story of Elite Motors spread through the luxury car world, a cautionary tale about underestimating people and the power of patient, principled leadership. Richard still sometimes drives past the dealership in his leased BMW, seeing his former empire now shining brighter than ever. But he doesn't stop in anymore. After all, his Uber rating isn't quite up to our standards. They say money is the root of all evil, but in my experience, it's just the water that makes buried secrets grow. I'm Diana Chen, 34, and until last month, I was the dutiful daughter who sent half her paycheck home every month to support her parents. Looking back, I should have seen the signs sooner, but love has a way of blinding you to the obvious. I'd always been the responsible one, working part-time jobs through college, taking out student loans so my younger brother Kevin could attend a private university debt-free. Your brother needs the best education possible, Mom would say. He's going to be a doctor. The fact that I was studying to be an engineer apparently didn't merit the same consideration. The monthly transfer started 5 years ago, right after I landed my dream job at a tech startup in San Francisco. The company had just gone public, and my salary jumped significantly. Mom called the day after the news made the local paper back home in Portland. "Diana, sweetie," she'd said, her voice carrying that particular tone I learned to dread since childhood. "Your father and I are having some difficulties with the mortgage." It started small, $2,000 a month to help with the house payment, then their car needed repairs. Dad's medical insurance didn't cover some new prescriptions. Mom's art gallery wasn't doing well due to the economy. Every month brought a new crisis, a new need, a new reason why they couldn't possibly manage without my help. Meanwhile, Kevin finished medical school and started his residency at a prestigious hospital in Boston. "Isn't it wonderful?" Mom would gush during our weekly video calls. "And he's dating the chief of surgery's daughter." Such a good match. No one seemed to notice or care that I was putting my own life on hold. The down payment I'd been saving for a house gradually dwindled. The promotion I wanted required additional certifications I couldn't afford to pursue. Dating became an afterthought. How could I plan a future when my present was mortgaged to my parents' needs? Then I met Stephen at a tech conference. Brilliant, kind, and surprisingly understanding about my financial situation. "Your devotion to your family is admirable," he said on our third date. "But don't you think it's time they learn to manage on their own?" I brushed off his concerns. They were my parents, after all. They'd sacrificed so much for us growing up. But his words planted a seed of doubt that grew stronger each time I had to say no to another opportunity, another dream, another step forward in my own life. The breaking point came last week. I'd finally saved enough for the certification program that could put me in line for the head engineer position. The same day I was planning to submit my application, Mom called in tears. "The gallery's in trouble," she sobbed. "We need $50,000 by the end of the month or we'll lose everything. You're our only hope, sweetheart. Your brother's still paying off his student loans, and you know how important the gallery is to me." I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at my laptop screen where the certification program application waited. 5 years of supporting them had already cost me over $150,000. The $50,000 in my savings was meant to finally be an investment in my own future. I can't, Mom," I said quietly. "Not this time." The silence on the other end was deafening. Can't? Her voice turned cold. Or won't? After everything we've done for you? We gave up so much to give you and your brother a good life. And this is how you repay us. Mom, I've been sending money home for 5 years. I need to think about my own future too. Your future? She laughed bitterly. What about my future, my gallery? Do you know what people will say if we have to close? What it will do to our standing in the community? How can you be so selfish? The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. How many times had I heard that growing up? Selfish for wanting new school supplies when Kevin needed sports equipment. Selfish for applying to out-of-state colleges when they needed me at home. Selfish for pursuing engineering instead of something more suitable for a girl. I'm not being selfish, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I'm being realistic. I need to know where all this money is going. You and Dad should be able to manage on your pensions and Social Security. The house is almost paid off. What's really going on? How dare you question us? Mom's voice rose. After everything we've sacrificed. Well, if you're going to be like this, don't bother calling until you've come to your senses, and don't expect us to support your choices anymore. She hung up before I could point out the irony of that last statement. That night, I couldn't sleep. Years of financial statements and excuses swirled in my mind. Stephen's words about enabling dependency echoed in my thoughts. Something wasn't adding up, but I couldn't see the full picture. The next morning, I called in sick to work and started digging. My parents' mortgage information was still in my files. I'd been making the payments directly for years. A call to the bank revealed something interesting. The mortgage payments I'd been sending weren't going to the home loan at all. That loan was paid off 2 years ago, Ms. Chen. The bank representative said. The payments are being directed to a different account. My hands shook as I requested more information. Using the power of attorney I'd been given for emergencies, I accessed their bank statements. What I found made my blood run cold. Regular transfers to an account I didn't recognize. Large withdrawals coinciding with Kevin's emergency requests for help with student loans. Loans that should have been covered by his hospital's repayment program. Payments to luxury retailers, high-end restaurants, flight bookings to Boston. Then I found the credit card statements. My parents, it seemed, had been living quite well on my support payments, designer clothes, art collecting trips, country club memberships, and most surprisingly, regular deposits into an investment account in Kevin's name. But the gallery receipts told the most interesting story. Mom's struggling business had actually been quite profitable for the past 3 years. The books showed healthy sales and substantial profits that were being systematically hidden and redirected. I was still staring at the statements when my phone buzzed. A text from Kevin. How could you do this to Mom and Dad? They've given you everything and now you're abandoning them? You've always been jealous of my success. You're ruining everything. Jealous of his success. The success built on my sacrificed dreams. I took a deep breath and typed back a single line. Check your trust fund statement lately, little brother. Then I called Stephen. Remember when you said it was time they learned to manage on their own? I said when he answered. I think it's actually time for something else. Time for the truth to come out. I spent the rest of the day making copies of everything I found. Bank statements, credit card bills, gallery records, investment accounts. The web of financial manipulation was breathtaking in its complexity. And in its betrayal. A message from Mom popped up on my phone. Your father and I are very disappointed in you. We raised you better than this. If you ever want to be part of this family again, you'll send them money by Friday. I looked at the certification program application still open on my laptop, then at the stack of financial records beside me. For the first time in years, I felt not guilt but anger. Clean, clarifying anger. You're right, Mom, I whispered to the screen. You did raise me better than this. Better than lies. Better than theft. Better than betrayal. I picked up my phone and made a call to the one person who could help me understand exactly what my parents had been doing with my money and how to make it stop. Hello, I said when the receptionist answered. I need to speak with someone about reporting financial fraud. The forensic accountant's office was cool and impersonal, much like the numbers she was showing me on her computer screen. Your parents have been running quite a sophisticated operation, Maria Delgado explained, scrolling through the documents I provided. The gallery was essentially a front for money laundering. Your support payments were being used to create the appearance of legitimate business income, while the actual gallery profits were being hidden to avoid taxes. I gripped the armrests of my chair and the investment account in my brother's name. A trust fund built primarily with your money and hidden gallery profits. Current balance just over $800,000. The room seemed to spin. Nearly $1 million while I lived in a tiny apartment and put my life on hold. What are my options? I asked, proud of how steady my voice remained. Maria leaned back in her chair. Given the evidence, you have several. You could report this to the IRS and FBI. This level of financial fraud and tax evasion would interest them greatly. You could pursue civil action to recover your money. Or you could confront your family with the evidence and try to resolve this privately. But given the systematic nature of their deception, I wouldn't recommend that route. My phone buzzed. Another text from Mom. The bank called about you accessing our accounts. How dare you spy on us? Your father is having chest pains from the stress you're causing. I hope you're happy. The familiar guilt rose up, but this time I recognized it for what it was. Another manipulation tool. I want it all, I said to Maria, civil and criminal. They need to face consequences. The next week was a blur of legal meetings and paperwork. I filed complaints with multiple agencies, documented every transaction, every lie, every manipulation. Stephen stayed by my side through all of it, offering support and righteous anger when my resolve wavered. Then came the letter from my parents' lawyer, threatening to sue me for defamation. I recognized the law firm name, the same one that handled Kevin's trust fund. They're bluffing, my lawyer assured me. They know we have documentation for everything. This is just an attempt to scare you into backing down. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. The confrontation happened at the gallery during one of Mom's prestigious artists and collectors' evenings. I walked in just as she was finishing her welcome speech to Portland's elite. And of course, she was saying we must support struggling local artists in these difficult economic times. Speaking of support, I said loudly, making her freeze mid-gesture. Let's talk about how you've been supporting my brother's secret trust fund with my money. The elegant crowd turned to stare. Mom's face went pale. Diana, this isn't the time or place. Actually, it's exactly the right time and place. I pulled out copies of the financial records. You've been using this gallery to launder money, using my support payments to create fake income while hiding the real profits. Shall we discuss the tax implications of that? Security, Mom called out, but I noticed none of the staff moved. They've all been served with subpoenas, I informed her. They'll be testifying about the gallery's real income versus what's been reported. Just like the bank records will show where my money really went. Not to your mortgage, which was paid off years ago, but to Kevin's trust fund and your luxury shopping. You ungrateful little, she started, but Dad's hand on her arm stopped her. Diana, he said, his voice carrying that authoritative tone that used to make me crumble. You're making serious accusations. Think very carefully about what you're doing to this family. Family? I laughed. A family doesn't steal from their daughter while privileging their son. A family doesn't manipulate and lie and commit fraud. A family doesn't what? Kevin's voice rang out as he pushed through the crowd. Doesn't take care of their own. Mom and Dad knew I'd need capital to start my own practice. They were just planning for my future. With my money, I turned to face the gathered crowd. Let me tell you all a story about family, about parents who took half their daughter's income for years, claiming poverty while living in luxury. About a brother who knew his trust fund was being built with his sister's sacrificed dreams. About a struggling gallery that's actually been profitable for years, but the profits were being hidden to avoid taxes. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Several prominent collectors began edging toward the door. The IRS and FBI have been notified, I continued. They're very interested in the gallery's creative bookkeeping. And I filed civil suits to recover every penny that was stolen from me. You'll destroy us, Mom whispered, tears streaming down her face. No, I corrected her. You destroy yourselves. I'm just exposing the truth. The aftermath was both better and worse than I expected. The gallery was seized as evidence. Mom and Dad were charged with multiple counts of tax evasion and fraud. Kevin's trust fund was frozen pending investigation. The family I'd known, or thought I knew, imploded. Mom alternated between tearful pleas for forgiveness and vicious accusations of betrayal. Dad retreated into stony silence. Kevin raged about his ruined plans as if he had any right to plans built on my stolen money. But something unexpected happened too. Other voices began reaching out. Cousins who'd seen through my parents' facade years ago, but hadn't known how to tell me. Former gallery employees with stories of being forced to participate in the deception. Even some of Mom's society friends admitting they'd suspected something wasn't right but had kept quiet to maintain social harmony. 6 months later, I sat in my new office at work, looking at my professional engineering certification on the wall. The promotion had come through, along with a significant raise. Stephen and I had just put a deposit down on a condo, my first real investment in my own future. Mom and Dad took a plea deal to avoid longer sentences. They'll serve some time, though not as much as they probably deserve. The restitution payments will take years, but I'm less interested in recovering the money than in maintaining the boundaries I've finally learned to set. Kevin lost his position at the prestigious hospital when a scandal broke. Last I heard, he was working at a small practice in rural Maine, learning for the first time what it means to actually earn his way. Yesterday, I received a letter from Mom in prison. "I know we hurt you," she wrote, "but we're still family. Someday, when you have children of your own, you'll understand that parents just want what's best for their children." I wrote back one line. "That's exactly why I'll never treat my children the way you treated me." The gallery building is for sale now. I drive past it sometimes, remembering all the lies that were sold there along with the art. The for sale sign seems like a metaphor. Everything has its price, but the true cost isn't always measured in dollars. Stephen suggested we should buy it, turn it into something positive. Maybe a community art space or education center. Transform the scene of the crime, he said with a smile. I'm considering it. There would be a certain poetry in turning a place of deception into a space for truth and growth. But first, I'm focusing on transforming myself. From the dutiful daughter who enabled financial abuse into a woman who knows her worth can't be measured by her bank account. The forensic accountant's final report sits in my desk drawer. Sometimes I take it out and read it, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself that clarity comes at a cost, and some prices are worth paying. They say money is the root of all evil, but I've learned it's really just a mirror, reflecting who we truly are. My parents saw it as a tool for control and manipulation. My brother saw it as his birthright, but I finally learned to see it for what it is, just a resource, neither good nor evil, useful only in service of our true values. Last week, I started a support group for adult children of financially abusive parents. The stories I hear echo my own, the guilt, the manipulation, the slow erosion of self-worth. But there's hope too, in sharing our experiences and learning to set boundaries. Mom's gallery used to have a sign. Art is truth seen through a lie. How fitting that their biggest lie, their carefully constructed facade of parental sacrifice and family unity, ultimately revealed the hardest truth of all. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the family you need to become who you're meant to be. I'm building a new family now, one based on honesty and mutual respect. Stephen and I are talking about marriage, about children, about creating the kind of home where love doesn't come with a price tag and support doesn't mean surrender. The money they stole can be replaced. The dreams they delayed can be pursued. But the truth they tried to hide, that's priceless. And it's mine to keep.
I grew up in Lexington, Massachusetts, in a modest colonial with 4 bedrooms, a swing set in the back, and the kind of white shutters that made the neighborhood look postcard perfect. Inside, though, our family orbit revolved almost entirely around my older brother, Ethan. From the moment he arrived, 2 years before me, he was the shining center of my parents' attention. The evidence was everywhere. Entire shelves in the living room displayed his baseball trophies, team photos, and framed report cards with great effort scrawled by his teachers. When he outgrew one bedroom theme, my parents eagerly redecorated first rockets, then sports pennants. Finally, a teenager's retreat with navy walls and a new desk. My room stayed pale yellow with the same twin bed and curtains I'd had since kindergarten. Gifts told their own story. One Christmas, Ethan unwrapped a baseball signed by the Red Sox, a treasure that earned gasps of delight from my father. My turn came with a thick dictionary, still stiff from the store. "You love words," my mother said as I turned its heavy pages. I did, but even at 10 years old, I knew it wasn't the same as a signed ball held aloft like a crown jewel. School achievements hardly shifted the balance. When I won the regional science fair with a project on solar cells, my parents offered distracted congratulations and hurried off to Ethan's doubleheader that same afternoon. I learned quickly that my value was measured by how neatly I fit their picture of the golden son and his capable, accommodating sister. By the time I was 13, I stopped expecting applause. Instead, I began storing away a quiet, private resolve that if love in my house was conditional, my future would not be, and that future began, unexpectedly, in my grandmother's kitchen. My grandmother, Margaret Warren, had a way of seeing me when no one else bothered to look. She had worked as an accountant in Boston back when women in that field were rare, and though retired by the time I was a teenager, her sharpness never dulled. While my parents hovered over Ethan's baseball practices, I often walked the half-mile to her tidy brick house, where the scent of cinnamon rolls always seemed to linger. One afternoon, when I was 15, she set aside her knitting needles and asked if I knew what compound interest was. I shook my head, expecting a lecture, but she pulled out a yellow notepad and began sketching numbers with her fountain pen. "Imagine you put $100 in the bank," she said, explaining how it grew over time if left untouched. The way her pen danced across the page made it feel like magic, though she reminded me it was nothing but math and patience. I went home that evening and emptied my babysitting earnings into a savings account. It wasn't much, but the act itself felt like claiming a piece of independence. Over the next few years, Grandma nurtured that instinct. She gave me articles to read, helped me buy my first modest stocks, and reminded me that discipline mattered more than flashes of luck. When she passed away suddenly during my junior year of college, I was devastated. My parents assumed her small estate would be divided equally, but her attorney revealed she had left me everything $50,000. My father immediately suggested I share it with Ethan to ease the cost of his graduate program. My mother nodded in agreement. I refused. "She gave this to me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I invested every cent, exactly as she had taught me, knowing she would have approved. Her final words to me, spoken during our last visit, echoed in my head, wealth whispers, "It doesn't shout." Those whispers became the foundation of the life I would later build, even as I kept them hidden. By the time I graduated, the quiet discipline she instilled in me had already begun to shape two separate lives. College marked the first true split between Ethan's world and mine. He headed to a private university in Connecticut, the kind of place where tuition alone could buy a starter home. My parents covered every cent, proudly driving him to campus with a car full of brand-new furnishings. I, on the other hand, earned a full scholarship to UMass Amherst. My father dropped me off with 2 suitcases and a box of secondhand supplies, telling me I'd figure it out. I did. Most mornings, I worked the opening shift at the campus coffee shop before classes. Weekends, I logged hours at the library or tutored students in economics. The exhaustion was constant, but I held on to perfect grades, determined never to waste what Grandma had given me. Finance became more than a major. It was a lifeline, a way to build the kind of independence no one could strip away. During my junior summer, I landed an internship in New York City with a respected investment firm. The energy of Manhattan, the towers, the rush of Wall Street lit something in me that never dimmed. After graduation, I accepted a junior analyst position at Blackstone. The salary was modest, but the exposure was invaluable. I rented a tiny apartment with 3 roommates, lived on takeout, and invested half my paycheck. By 26, after years of relentless saving and studying market patterns, I took the leap. I started my own boutique firm, focusing on undervalued companies in emerging industries. At first, it was just me in a cramped co-working space, but opportunities came quickly. A biotech startup, a renewable energy firm, a small tech acquisition, each risk multiplied what I had built. By 32, my net worth quietly reached $13 million. Outwardly, nothing changed when I visited home. I drove rental cars instead of my Tesla, wore plain clothes instead of designer, and deflected questions about my job with vague answers. The mask was necessary, or so I told myself, but every year it grew heavier, and when Michael entered my life, he was the first to notice the weight I carried. I met Michael Carver at a charity event in the city, one of those evenings where industry people clink glasses under dim lighting and pretend to network casually. He wasn't part of finance. He was an architect with a practice in Manhattan, known for designing spaces that combined elegance with functionality. What drew me in wasn't his resume, but his ease. He listened, really listened, in a way I wasn't used to. We started with dinners after long days, then weekend walks through Central Park, and eventually nights spent in each other's apartments. Michael never asked about the numbers I managed or the clients I served. He wanted to know what books I loved, why I still cooked my grandmother's recipes, why I always avoided questions about family. For months. I gave him the same deflections I gave everyone else. They're fine. Just busy. Nothing much to tell. One evening in October, after 3 months of dating, he caught me off guard. We had just finished dinner at my place, and I had hung up from a short call with my mother. My answers clipped and vague. Michael set down his wine glass and asked quietly, "Why do you erase yourself around your family?" The words landed like a stone in water. I had spent years perfecting that erasure, smoothing out my life so my parents wouldn't question it, dimming my light so Ethan could stay their golden child. But Michael's gaze was steady, waiting. So I told him. I told him about the photo albums, the trophies, the necklace Ethan got while I unwrapped books, the way my achievements had always been minimized. I explained why I kept my wealth a secret, that if they knew, it would only become Ethan's money in their eyes. He didn't interrupt, just listened, then leaned forward. "Living divided can't last forever," he said gently. "At some point, you'll have to decide which life you want." His words lingered long after he left that night. By the time Thanksgiving approached, I knew he was right. I couldn't keep pretending to be less than I was. I decided to bring him home with me to Boston and to stop shrinking, even if I wasn't ready to reveal everything. The drive from New York to Lexington was lined with bare trees and the first traces of frost on the roadside. Michael kept one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly over mine, as if he could sense the knot in my stomach tightening with every mile closer to home. By the time we turned onto my parents' quiet street, the sky had gone gray and the air carried that damp chill unique to Massachusetts in late November. Ethan's new Audi gleamed in the driveway, its paint still bright from the dealer's lot. I knew without asking that my parents had helped finance it. They always did. My chest tightened at the sight, but Michael only squeezed my hand. Inside, my mother swept past me to embrace Michael, her voice high with excitement at meeting him. My father clapped him on the back, asking about his practice, while I received a distracted smile and a quick pat on the shoulder. Ethan appeared a moment later, all polished confidence, and was introduced to Michael as though I were only incidental in the connection. Dinner that evening felt scripted, every line already assigned. My mother had prepared Ethan's favorite roast, and conversation orbited around his recent promotion at a Boston marketing firm. He described his corner office and the junior staff reporting to him, while my parents beamed with pride. I pushed peas across my plate, offering polite nods, my own career once again invisible. Later, Michael and I were shown to the small guest room, its pull-out sofa sagging in the middle. Ethan and his wife were given the larger guest suite with the queen bed and private bath. When I raised an eyebrow, my mother explained, "Ethan's back needs proper support." I said nothing, though heat rose in my chest. That night, as I passed the kitchen for water, I heard my parents speaking in hushed tones. "I just wish Selena had more ambition." My mother sighed. My father replied, "She's always been content with less. Not like Ethan." I stood frozen in the hallway, the words as sharp as they had been when I was a child, and knew the cracks in my silence were widening. Thanksgiving morning began with the smell of turkey already in the oven and my mother humming in the kitchen. I slipped outside to take a call. I couldn't avoid one of my partners finalizing terms on a deal that involved seven-figure commitments and timing the release of capital. My voice was low, measured, but I felt exposed standing there in my parents' backyard, surrounded by the same picket fences that had framed my childhood. When I hung up, Ethan was leaning against the back door, his eyes narrowed, arms crossed. Since when does data entry involve million-dollar portfolios? His tone carried a bite, but before I could answer, my mother called him inside to set the table. He gave me a long look before disappearing, suspicion written all over his face. Later, as we dressed for dinner, Michael mentioned our upcoming trip. "We'll be in Tokyo for 2 weeks," he told my father casually. "Selena has a client there, and we're staying on to explore." The words seemed harmless, but I saw Ethan's head snap up from across the room. He stared at me, as if piecing together a puzzle he hadn't known existed. When the meal was over, I brought out the television wrapped in silver paper and a blue bow. My parents gasped as my father tore off the wrapping to reveal a 55-inch smart TV. Their old set was nearly a decade behind. I thought the gift would be a small kindness. Instead, my mother frowned. "Selena, this must have cost a fortune." "It was on sale," I said. But the lie felt brittle. Ethan wasn't convinced. He leaned down, reading the model number off the box, then tapped furiously on his phone. $1,500, he announced, his voice sharp. He turned to me, eyes flashing. "Since when can you afford this on your salary?" The room went quiet, forks clinking faintly against plates as everyone looked my way. My mask was slipping, and for the first time in years, I wasn't sure I had the strength or even the desire to put it back on. Ethan's eyes locked on mine, daring me to explain away the numbers glowing from his phone screen. My parents waited too, my mother clutching her napkin in both hands, my father frozen mid-motion with his fork. The silence stretched until I felt it pressing against my ribs. "I don't work in data entry," I said finally, my voice steady though my pulse thundered. "I own an investment firm." "We've been successful." Ethan let out a sharp laugh, half disbelief, half anger. "Successful? Try secretive? You've been hiding this while Mom and Dad helped me cover my car loan while they worried about mortgage payments." His voice rose as he scrolled furiously. "Oh my God. Forbes, $13 million. Is this a joke?" My mother gasped, her hand trembling as she reached for her water glass. My father still hadn't spoken. His face had gone pale, his fork resting untouched on the plate. Ethan shoved the phone across the table toward them. "Look at this. She's been sitting on a fortune while we thought she was scraping by." I drew a breath, the years pressing forward like witnesses waiting their turn. "Do you want to know what I've been sitting on?" I asked quietly. "Let's go back. The science fair I won in middle school, you skipped it for Ethan's baseball game. My graduation speech, you filmed Ethan's reactions instead of my words. College, I worked 3 jobs while you paid his tuition in full and gave him an allowance." My parents' faces shifted from shock to a dawning, uncomfortable recognition. I pressed on. "You gave him new furniture, new cars, new beginnings. I got hand-me-downs and you'll figure it out." And I did figure it out. Without your help, without your pride, alone. The table was silent except for Ethan's uneven breathing. His expression hardened, anger simmering past disbelief. "You're selfish," he spat. "You let us think you were nothing while you hoarded millions?" I met his glare, the ledger of years laid bare between us, and for the first time, I felt no need to shrink. Ethan shoved his chair back so hard it scraped against the hardwood floor. His voice boomed across the table, rattling the glasses. 13 million, and you've never offered to help Brad and I have been trying to buy a house for years. Mom and Dad dipped into their retirement for us, and you just sit there hoarding." My mother was crying openly now, her shoulders shaking. My father's lips moved, but no sound came. He looked as though the ground had shifted beneath him. "I owe nothing," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Every dollar I have came from my work, my discipline, and my choices. I built this alone. Ethan jabbed a finger toward me. Family helps family. That's how it works. You think you're better than us now, Michael, who had been silent through most of the eruption, leaned forward, his calmness cutting through the noise. From what I've seen, Selena has been giving to this family her entire life, just not with money. She's given patience, silence, and the space for everyone else to shine. Maybe it's time someone gave her the respect she's earned. Ethan's face flushed crimson, but for once he had no quick retort. My mother's sobs filled the space where words might have landed. My father just stared at me, his fork still on the plate, as if the simplest act lifting it was suddenly impossible. I stood, laying my napkin beside my plate. Michael and I will be staying at a hotel tonight. My voice did not waver. My mother reached out, pleading through tears, but I stepped back. Michael rose beside me, steady and certain. Together we walked through the dining room, past the untouched pie and the silence heavy as stone, out into the cold November air. The night sky was sharp and clear, the chill bracing on my skin. For the first time in years, the weight of my silence felt lighter, though the cost of breaking it had only just begun to show. The morning light streamed through the hotel curtains, pale and unforgiving. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand. 17 new messages from Ethan, each swinging between outrage and guilt. My mother had left tearful voicemails, begging me to come back, insisting we could talk it through. I silenced the phone and let the quiet settle. Not long after, a knock sounded at the door. Michael opened it to find my father standing there, rumpled and weary, yesterday's clothes still on his back. He stepped inside without meeting my eyes, then sat heavily in the desk chair. For a long moment, he said nothing, just rubbed his hands together. Finally, he looked up. We took the easy road with Ethan, he admitted, his voice rough. He cried, he demanded, and we gave in. You adapted. It wasn't fair, but it was easier. Hearing him name it out loud was both relief and wound. I steadied myself before answering. It's too late to undo the past, but going forward, there are boundaries. I won't give Ethan a dime. My finances are mine, and I won't discuss them with anyone in this family. If you want a relationship with me, respect has to be equal. He nodded slowly, as if the weight of my words was finally sinking in. For the first time, I saw regret flicker behind his eyes, though no apology could erase decades of neglect. Later, as Michael and I packed, I found myself thinking of Ethan's children. None of this was their fault. I began sketching an idea in my mind, a trust fund strictly for their education, structured so Ethan could never touch it. It felt like a line between compassion and protection, the only compromise I could live with. By the time we loaded our bags into the car, the decision had hardened into something close to peace. Even if the fractures at home remained raw, months passed, and the storm quieted into something less volatile but still fragile. My father called every few weeks, his tone cautious yet more honest than I had ever known. He asked about my work not out of obligation, but with genuine curiosity, and admitted he had never really seen me for who I was. My mother's calls were harder, tangled with guilt and habit. She still slipped into old patterns, invoking Ethan, but sometimes caught herself and shifted, as if learning a new language slowly. Ethan I cut off entirely. His barrage of demands turned into accusations, then into silence once I blocked him. The absence felt less like loss than relief, a wound finally closed to air. I began therapy, sitting across from a woman who gave words to the years I had carried alone, favoritism, erasure, the hunger for recognition. Piece by piece, I began to set it down. With space cleared, I found myself drawn to giving in ways that felt purposeful. I mentored young women entering finance, women who reminded me of myself at 20, determined but underestimated. I funded initiatives for girls in STEM, Small acts of investment that rippled wider than I expected. Michael stood with me through it all, steady and present, never asking me to be less or more than I was. Together, we built new traditions, holidays with friends, weekends away, a community that felt chosen rather than assigned. One evening, as spring settled into the city, I hung a small brass key on the wall of our apartment. I'd had it engraved with a single word, boundaries. It caught the light from the window, a quiet emblem of everything I had reclaimed and everything I would protect going forward. The china glistened under the chandelier as I sat across from my parents at their long mahogany table. It was the kind of setting they thrived in, formal, controlled, everything polished until it gleamed. My mother, Marjorie, poured another glass of wine as my father, Alden, slid a thick envelope across the table. "Serafina," he said smoothly, "this is about security. For you. For all of us." I rested my hands in my lap, steadying my breath. The envelope lay between us like a challenge. My mother smiled as though she were offering me dessert. "It's just a formality. One family, one future." I pulled the papers free, scanning the first page. The words blurred for a moment, but the intent was clear. Every account, every investment, every property I had built was to be placed into a family trust, managed solely by them. My father nudged a pen closer. "This way. We all move forward together. No more silos. No more risk." Inside, something coiled tight. They weren't just asking, they were demanding everything I had spent my adult life creating. I looked up slowly, catching the faint triumph in their eyes, the expectation that I would fold out of duty, or guilt, or both. Instead, I let my lips curve into a calm smile. "If this is truly about trust, then you won't mind what I've prepared." For the first time that evening, their expressions faltered. My mother's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. My father's jaw flexed. At that precise moment, the butler stepped into the dining room, his voice formal but edged with tension. "Ma'am," he said, "your lawyer is here." I leaned back in my chair, heart steady. The real conversation was about to begin. When Helena's heels clicked against the floor behind me, I felt the weight of my parents' stares sharpen. But before the first word left her mouth, my mind pulled me back to the years that had carried me here, the years when I learned no one was coming to save me. In my early 20s, Portland was shifting, neighborhoods gentrifying faster than anyone could keep up. I saw it as opportunity. While friends spent their weekends at bars, I was crouched on the floors of run-down kitchens, stripping tiles, painting cabinets, and coaxing life back into homes most people wouldn't glance at twice. My hands blistered, my back ached, but I kept going. I reinvested every dollar I made, flipping one house into the down payment for another. At 25, I signed the papers on my first Craftsman duplex. Holding the keys felt like holding proof that discipline mattered more than pedigree. Still, when I showed my parents, their reaction was a dismissive laugh. "You were lucky the market turned," my mother said. "Without us, you'd never manage," my father added. Their words stung, but not more than the memory I carried from college the day I asked them to co-sign my student loan. They refused, claiming it would teach me responsibility. It did, though not in the way they intended. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, lived in a cramped basement apartment with mold on the walls. Their refusal cut me, but it also forged me. Over time, the duplex became 3 properties, then 5. I learned to negotiate, to anticipate market turns, to stand firm when contractors tried to talk down to me. Each decision, each closing, each mortgage paid off was my own doing. My parents never lifted a finger, yet they acted as though my success reflected on them. Now, as I sat in their dining room, contract heavy in my hands, I realized their neglect had given me the very independence they despised, and I knew it was that independence they were trying so hard to strip away. Looking back, I realized the contract at the dinner table wasn't born out of thin air. My parents had been testing the waters for years, softening me with little jabs disguised as family wisdom. "You should merge finances," my mother once said over coffee, her tone deceptively casual. "Family must stick together. What's the point of keeping things separate if we're all working toward the same future?" My father preferred guilt as his weapon. "After all we sacrificed for you, don't we deserve to feel secure? Money should circulate within the family, not sit idle in your accounts." At the time, I brushed their comments aside. I told myself it was just their way of holding on, of trying to stay relevant in a world that was quickly moving past them. Still, their words always left a sting, like a faint burn I couldn't quite soothe. One afternoon, I came home early from a showing and found my father in my apartment. The lease had my name alone, the locks were new, yet there he was, rifling through the drawer where I kept property deeds and bank statements. He looked up, startled, before recovering with a stiff smile. "Just curious," he said, as if curiosity gave him a right to my life. I forced a laugh, told myself he was old-fashioned, raised in an era where a father felt entitled to his child's papers, but when he left, I noticed the envelope holding my latest closing statement was half out of place, like a page had been thumbed too far. For a while, I convinced myself it was nothing. Parents worried, parents' pride, parents crossed boundaries out of love, but deep down, a small voice began to whisper that it wasn't love at all. It was entitlement. That voice grew louder each time they brought up unity and legacy, until it was impossible to ignore. And by the time the contract appeared on the dinner table, I knew that whisper had been right all along. Helena's arrival was as sharp as a blade slicing through silk. She stepped into the dining room with her briefcase in hand, her eyes cool, assessing the scene before her. My parents stiffened in unison, as though they hadn't expected me to arrive with armor. "Good evening," Helena said smoothly, setting her case on the edge of the table. "I understand there's a contract my client is supposed to sign." Marjorie's smile cracked. "This is a private family matter. There's no need for lawyers." Helena ignored her, sliding the papers from the envelope. She flipped through them quickly, her brow arching higher with each page. Then came the smirk. "Wow," she murmured, closing the folder with a snap. "This isn't a trust. It's a complete transfer of authority. If Serafina signed this, you'd have unilateral control over her assets. Every dollar, every property, every account." The silence that followed was suffocating. My father recovered first. "It's about trust. Helena, about protecting our family from risk." His voice was calm, but the muscle in his jaw betrayed him. "Interesting," Helena replied evenly, "because what I see is a document where Serafina loses every right to her own money. If it's really about trust, why is she the only one who surrenders anything?" My mother leaned forward, her tone syrupy sweet. "You know us. Serafina, we'd never hurt you. This is just a formality." I sat back, my hands folded neatly in my lap. The contract lay on the table between us, a symbol of everything they thought they could demand. I could feel their eyes pressing against me, willing me to break, to cave, to sign. Instead, I looked directly at them and let my voice cut through the air like glass. "We're finished here tonight." For the first time in my life, I saw something rare in my parents' expressions, not control, not confidence, but fear. It flickered across their faces before they masked it, but I caught it, and it settled into me like a promise. I pushed my chair back, steady and deliberate, already knowing they wouldn't let this end so easily. I had barely risen from my chair when my father's voice cut through the air. "Sit down. Serafina, you're not thinking clearly." My mother's hand fluttered toward the untouched wine glass in front of me. "There's something you need to hear first," she said, her tone softer than I'd heard it all evening. "Something that changes everything." Against my better judgment, I eased back into my seat. Helena stood behind me, arms crossed, her presence a steady anchor. My father steepled his fingers and fixed me with a measured stare. The Vance estate in Rhode Island, he began, has been tied up in probate for years. But the process is nearing its end. We're poised to regain full control of the property and its assets. It's worth more than you can imagine. Marjorie leaned in, her smile sharp but dressed in warmth. And of course, you are our daughter. You stand to benefit as much as we do. But unity is essential. Probate courts value stability. Families that fracture, well, let's just say judges don't look kindly on chaos. The implication was unmistakable. Sign the contract, prove my loyalty, and I'd be welcomed into the circle of inheritance. Refuse, and I'd be cast out. For a moment, I let them talk, their words dripping like honey over poison. They painted the estate as a fortress of history and legacy, something that was rightfully mine if only I'd surrender my independence. But beneath the varnish, I saw the truth. The Rhode Island estate wasn't a gift, it was a leash. They wanted me tethered, bound not just by blood, but by paper and pen. My wealth had become their bargaining chip, and the so-called inheritance was the bait. I glanced at Helena. She didn't speak, but her eyes told me she understood. This wasn't about legacy. It was about control. My father's glare hardened, a storm gathering behind his calm facade. Without us, he said flatly, you'll lose everything. I straightened my spine, steadying my breath. The irony nearly made me laugh. They had given me nothing, yet now they threatened to take it all. Helena placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder that we weren't finished. And I knew then that the only way forward was not just to defend what I had built, but to uncover just how deep their desperation ran. After that dinner, I knew talk would get me nowhere. My parents weren't negotiating, they were cornering. So the very next morning, I hired a private investigator. His name was Grant Mercer, a man with a reputation for finding truths people went to great lengths to bury. He worked quickly. Within a week, he placed a thick file on Helena's desk, and we went through it together. Each page was a window into the life my parents had been hiding, the Rhode Island estate they had dangled in front of me. It was mortgaged to the hilt, collateral for loans they had taken out over the last decade. The grand image of wealth they paraded antique furnishings, charitable galas, curated elegance was a mirage. Behind it lay years of reckless spending patched together by desperate borrowing. But the worst blow came near the end of the file, an application for a new credit line, bearing my name. My signature had been forged, but it was careful someone who had watched me sign documents countless times. I stared at the page until the lines blurred, rage and disbelief clawing at me. I thought about the little passbook savings account they opened for me when I was a child. I remembered my father lifting me up to the teller's counter, telling me I was learning responsibility. Back then, I believed them. Now, looking at the forged document, I realized they weren't teaching me responsibility at all. They were teaching themselves access. Helena's voice broke through my haze. This isn't just manipulation. Serafina, it's fraud, and it's criminal. The betrayal felt heavier than the paper in my hands. These were the people who raised me, who claimed to know what was best for me. Now they were stealing not just from my accounts, but from the very identity I had built without them. I set the file down and forced my hands to unclench. If they had crossed this line, there was no telling how far they were willing to go. And I knew the next step was to confront not just their debts, but the twisted logic that justified it all. The forged credit line haunted me long after I left Helena's office. It wasn't just the act itself, it was what it revealed. Late that night, lying awake, my mind wandered back to memories I had never questioned until now. When I was 10, I begged for piano lessons. My parents refused, telling me I needed to learn discipline without indulgence. When I asked for help with college applications, they brushed me off with a lecture about independence. And when I pleaded for a co-signature on my first loan, They refused again, claiming it was tough love. For years, I carried those moments like badges of resilience, proof that I could weather anything without their support. But looking back now, I saw them for what they were: rehearsals. They weren't teaching me independence, they were conditioning me to accept abandonment, to normalize neglect so that when exploitation came later, I might confuse it with love. The thought made me sick. Still, guilt slithered in, whispering that I was being unfair. After all, hadn't they given me a roof, meals, clothes? Wasn't I ungrateful for rejecting the people who raised me? I voiced this once to Helena, and she leaned forward, eyes steady on mine. Protecting yourself isn't betrayal. Serafina, betrayal already happened to you. Don't mistake survival for selfishness. Her words settled into me like stone, solid and undeniable. The weight of years lifted, replaced by something harder, sharper. I wasn't the child they'd tried to mold anymore. I wasn't someone who would bend out of guilt or fold under obligation. By the time I left her office that evening, my resolve was clear. My parents had rewritten my childhood into a story of sacrifice and obedience. Now, it was my turn to rewrite the ending, and I knew exactly where the confrontation had to begin. Helena wasted no time after the forged credit line surfaced. She brought in a forensic accountant she trusted, a quiet man named Drayton who had a talent for tracing money through shadows. Within days, he uncovered what I suspected but hadn't been able to prove: a hidden offshore account in my parents' names. The statements were staggering: transfers from shell companies, loans stacked on loans, and debts rolled over like dice on a rigged table. They had been juggling liabilities for years, using the illusion of wealth to buy more time. The truth was plain without an infusion of cash. Their empire was already crumbling, and the lifeline they had chosen was me. Helena's office became a war room. She assembled the evidence into a clean, devastating file: fraud, attempted forgery, coercion. Each section airtight, each page a nail in the coffin of their performance as noble benefactors. But I knew facts alone wouldn't be enough. My parents thrived on narrative, on turning guilt into currency. So I added something they couldn't dismiss as technical memory turned tangible. Years ago, my grandmother's locket and my grandfather's cufflinks had disappeared from the family safe. My parents told me they were being appraised. I accepted the explanation back then, but part of me always knew better. Now, tucked into Drayton's report, I placed the pawnshop receipts Helena had tracked down, proof they had sold our heirlooms for quick cash, proof their theft reached back not just into my adulthood, but into the very legacy they claimed to protect. When I looked at the growing pile of documents, I felt no satisfaction, only clarity. They had built a tower of lies so tall it was bound to collapse. All I needed to do was give it the right push. And for that, there was only one place left to deliver the blow back at their own dinner table. The next invitation arrived in the same gilded envelope as always, thick with pretense. My parents thought I would come alone, but I walked into their dining room with Helena at my side. The table was set with crystal and silver, but beneath the gleam, I could feel the tension pressing like humidity before a storm. Alden greeted me with his familiar air of command. "We trust you've reconsidered," he said, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. Marjorie's smile was brittle, her eyes shining with the confidence of someone convinced victory was inevitable. I sat, but instead of opening the folder they had prepared for me, Helena placed our own file squarely in the center of the table. She flipped it open with deliberate calm. Offshore accounts, forged signatures, pawned heirlooms, and debts stacked so high the estate is a hollow shell. The color drained from my mother's face. She reached across the table, her voice breaking. "Serafina, this isn't what it looks like. We only wanted to protect the family, to protect you." My father's composure cracked in a different direction. His fist slammed the armrest, rattling the silverware. "This is betrayal. After all we've done, you dare to side with outsiders against us? I met his fury with steady eyes. Family doesn't mean ownership. You've mistaken me for your rescue fund. I won't be the solution to debts you created. Marjorie's pleas dissolved into sobs, while Alden's glare cut across the room like a blade. But neither had time to recover. The sound of sirens filtered through the tall windows, growing louder until red and blue lights strobed against the glass. Helena closed the file and leaned back as footsteps echoed in the hall. The knock at the door was sharp, final. I watched as the officers entered, my parents' faces collapsing under the weight of exposure. And in that moment, I understood there was no turning back. The weeks that followed moved quickly. News of the investigation spread, and with it the collapse of the illusion my parents had built. The Rhode Island estate, once their proudest boast, was pulled into foreclosure. Creditors lined up at every door, stripping away what little remained of their borrowed grandeur. I watched from a distance, not with glee, but with a clarity I had never felt before. Their downfall wasn't mine to mourn, it was theirs to own. Meanwhile, I tightened the guard around my own life. Every property deed, every account statement, every safeguard I had prepared was secured in a fireproof safe. I changed locks, updated passwords, left nothing vulnerable. For the first time, my future felt entirely mine, untouched by guilt or expectation. One evening, I sat across from Helena at a quiet wine bar. Between us, no contracts, no files, just 2 glasses and the steady hum of relief. She raised hers with a small smile. "To freedom hard-earned," she said. I clinked my glass against hers, the sound sharp, decisive. "To freedom," I echoed, letting the words settle deep in my chest. Blood ties had once defined me, a thread I thought I was obligated to follow no matter where it led. But now I knew better. Love could exist without control, and family could be chosen, not imposed. As I walked home that night, the air felt lighter, the city streets alive with possibility. Freedom, I realized, was my truest inheritance, and I intended to protect it with everything I had.